Welcome to Navigating Hope, your compass to health empowerment. I'm Dr. Jaime Hope, steering you through healthcare, overcoming overwhelm, personal goals, and emergencies. We'll navigate the healthcare maze with actionable insights and real-world advice, unlocking the secrets to a healthier, more vibrant life. Join us to take control of your well-being and make informed decisions for your health and your future. Stay with us as we unravel the mysteries of medicine, wellness, and life's unforeseen challenges, helping you bypass the ER with a dose of knowledge. Stay tuned till the end of the episode with a recap of your actionable insights and a free gift. Let's chart a course to your well-being together. Welcome back to another episode of Navigating Hope. I am so excited today to welcome Kimberly Best. Let me tell you a little bit about her. So she is a nurse, ER background, so we've got a lot in common. A seasoned healthcare professional specializing in conflict mediation. And I have a feeling this is going to resonate with a lot of our listeners. And if there's anyone who doesn't have conflict in your life, I'd please, come on and share your secrets. But for the rest of us, she specializes in elder care and end-of-life decisions. She has dedicated her career to ensuring that individuals, particularly the elderly, receive the best possible care and support during critical times. As an experienced mediator, Kimberly works closely with families, with healthcare providers, and other stakeholders to help them navigate these complex decisions around aging, caregiving, and healthcare planning. Her approach emphasizes communication, conflict resolution, informed decision-making to ensure dignity, health, and the well-being of elderly patients and their families. Kimberly is the author of How to Live Forever, a guide to writing the final chapter of your life story, a book that helps families and individuals navigate those often challenging conversations at the end of life care. I mean, you have had just this incredible storied career. You're still doing things. In our pre-conversation before we hit record, I talked about how this should be just core curriculum for all healthcare professionals. So Kimberly, what made you passionate about conflict? That's an area most people want to run away from.
It is an area most people want to run away from. So truly, as an ER nurse, a trauma nurse first, I went through a period of burnout, which probably a lot of people in medicine can relate to. And I went back to graduate school in clinical community psychology. And when I finished that, I realized that for someone with the heart of an ER nurse, clinical community psychology was like watching paint dry. And I felt like I could never love my job there. So I went back into nursing. And then I went through a really bad divorce. And during the process of that, with everybody beating each other up and attorneys helping that a whole lot be a lot worse than it had to be, my brother, who is an educator, said, "Have you heard about this thing called mediation?" And of course I had not, because back then when you Googled you Google mediation, Google would say, "You mean meditation," which it's not remotely the same thing. So I went to Hofstra University and took some courses in transformative mediation. And I realized almost immediately that there were skill sets for conflict mitigation that we just haven't learned. And they're not difficult or complicated. And I was just awed because, as you recognize, the state of the world is becoming more and more conflicted. So I went back to graduate school again and in conflict management, got my master's in conflict management, and decided, by this time I'm in my 50s, and I decided that I wanted to dedicate the rest of my life to helping teach how to manage conflict, both in ourselves and with each other. So even though I wrote a book on end of life stuff, which gets the attention to most of what you were talking about, my passion is for conflict resolution, conflict management, conflict training within organizations, and most important, healthcare, because for my whole life, healthcare will be my tribe.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when you're ER and trauma, you're it for life. We can spot each other a mile away.
That's
And
fact.
yes, in conflict, it exists, whether you're talking about end of life care or going through a divorce or trying to get your teenager to pick up their socks. I mean, this is not strictly an end of life issue. It's everywhere. And so let's take kind of that broad approach philosophy, which I love, is not And many of us are conflict avoidant, right? So our way of handling it is to run and not do anything. But you have an interesting just philosophy about conflict, that it's not something to avoid, but to be understood and handled. So share with us how you view conflict.
Mm. Yeah, there's a lot that I could say about that. And you're right, I've studied it, and most people are conflict avoidant, which means that the conflict is there if it's unresolved. And I liken it to a sweeping it under the rug, right? And the pile gets so big that eventually it's too big to move. And conflict management is learning how to keep that pile from accumulating. The other thing that I've noticed about people in conflict is that they're almost always 90 something percent, maybe 98% are really good people. And although they're in conflict with each other, and they're going, he's a narcissist, she's a narcissist, because that's what people do. But a friend of mine said, all of us are never more narcissistic than when we're in pain, because when we're in pain, it's all about us. So we're seeing people in their worst. And I know that. Like, I know this is not the best version of that person. Conflict management helps them get back to that best version of themselves. And yeah, they learn skills about managing conflict also in the process. And the transformation is just so incredible that it feels almost spiritual to me. If you hold the space safely for conflict resolution, the process works and people see each other differently. And conflict is normal, but we don't know how to handle it well. With managing it well, we can have better outcomes than you would even dream possible, as crazy as that sounds.
Well, and I can see how it could sound crazy when you're in that emotional impact of the moment, but it really is possible. You've heard the expression, how someone treats you is a reflection of who they are, not who you are. But I think we need to give a broader grace to that. It's who they are in that moment with their
Amen.
capacity. When somebody comes in and they have been struck by a car and their femur is sticking out through their skin and they're cursing at the staff, that might not be who they are, but as you said, when you're in pain, all you are focusing on is you. And so you teach people how to understand both the humanity and the emotions behind that conflict. So, what are some ways you can kind of humanize it and bring it out of that fighting and into a realm of understanding?
That's such a good question. So, one of the first things, William Ury, who wrote Getting to Yes, has a thought that is sort of the basis of conflict management, and that is separating the people from the problem. Because take your favorite manager or least favorite manager, and that person or your colleague, that person is the problem in your head. Sally's the problem. Well, you cannot solve for people. But if you identify what the problem is, Sally's late, Sally leaves a mess, whatever the problem is to you, you can find a resolution for those problems. So one of the very first things to do is, identify the problem and don't make the person the problem. Yeah.
That's a really good way to start, because then it's not just you are all bad, but there's a specific, measurable, actionable thing that you can do to improve. That's just so much more empowering.
Right, right. And then the escalation of conflict. And I just did a presentation, and the nurses in here were amazed, because in a green solvable area, yellow, I have to win, you have to lose, and red, we all have to lose. Like, I'm going to blow up with the ship as long as you blow up too. Lots of teams are functioning in that yellow area, which is where I have a problem. I have to have people on my side with that problem. So I'm doing talking, which is creating a polarity within the system. You're either for somebody or against somebody. The story changes over time. The problem is no longer the problem. The person or the group of people are the problem. And then it becomes a win-lose. Somebody has to win and somebody has to lose. And nobody likes to lose. Like, it's. So the conflict management is about how to collaborate, to work together and create a situation where both people have a good outcome. So one of the things I do in organization is suggest that we approach each different with the thought of, how can I win and the other person win? And I will say one more thing about conflict that I think is, a really easy one to remember is when we go into conflict, we often think we have two choices, your way or my way. And there's a couple things we can do instead of saying your way or my way. We can put an and in there. How do we create an and where it's both of our ways? Or I like to say, your way's here, my way's here. There's all these things that are possible solutions on that line that really a conflict manager mediator helps to explore. So we expand options for resolution.
And I think that's so incredible because we do get caught in that binary, that black and white, and we get that tunnel vision and don't see there are so many possibilities in between. So I think that's fantastic. Let's walk through a real life situation. Okay, so say there are siblings kind of in 40s and 50s, and they have a parent who is showing signs of dementia, maybe kind of getting towards shouldn't be driving anymore, maybe making some questionable financial choices. And so you emphasize being proactive, right? So let's start with what can they do now before it becomes a full-on fight, and then we'll talk, okay, what if it's already at that fight? So let's start with proactive because that is so important.
Yeah, so that's a great thought. And I just want to say I've moved more out of family and into organizations, but the skills are the same.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely.
so, so it is, you know, they're not going to come for conflict management until the conflict is escalated, unfortunately. The sooner you can recognize conflict and say, a third party will help me see what I can't see, the better. But if I have a family, especially around aging, really any family, you have the whole family history that's participating in that conflict, not just the conflict itself. So you have someone who's still upset because they didn't get the biggest cookie when they were 2 years old, and they're carrying that with them, that all that unhealed conflict comes with it. So I think I always say in conflict, the things that have to occur is to feel seen, heard, validated. And I used to say those three things, but now I add value to that. To be seen, heard, validated, and valued. And when those things happen, you can begin to see someone else's perspective. So I manage that by giving each party in the conflict an opportunity to have that moment. And after that happens, we can start exploring what it looks like from somebody else's perspective. And then part of the outcome is what is called a BATNA. What's the worst thing that can happen if we don't negotiate an outcome? And, do you want something better? So unlike counseling, I think we're different than counseling because counseling goes back so much. We acknowledge the past, but we're very forward focused in, okay, these bad things did happen for sure, and they hurt you. Now, how can we have a better next moment or a better tomorrow or a better future? So that's probably one of the strongest parts of it is that it's like, okay, we acknowledge this was not good, and you get to your voice and how it hurts you, and it doesn't matter who's right or wrong. I do not do blame at all, but what do you want the future to look like?
And I really love the way that you frame that because being heard, being validated, being valued, those are essentially like the emotional kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? You don't really care what your hair looks like if your house is falling down, kind of thing. So, in order to get to those next steps of conflict resolution, so whether we're at our workplace, which I think this should just be mandatory in every healthcare setting, workplace, Starbucks, everywhere. So if we as an individual, so we're listening to this and we can't always affect what the other person is doing yet, we'll learn some of those skills, but what can we as an individual do to make sure the other person feels that, but also to express in a kind way that we also need those needs met, and here they are.
Yeah, definitely it needs two people to feel that to move forward. So the answer to your question is it depends, which is a mediator's favorite answer. It really just depends. I think, well, another thing that William Ury says is, in any given conflict, the most difficult person is the one in the mirror. And I'm trying to think where that's not true because we have assumptions, we have expectations, we have what Brene Brown calls the story we tell ourselves. And in the absence of facts, our brains are hardwired to make up a story. And that story has almost zero odds of being the right story because there are so many options. So that's one thing I find mostly that happens in conflict management is people find out that the story they told themselves is not actually what's going on. So just from an understanding. Then again, sometimes we can trade off, who's telling their story, but I've always set a space where that is a conversation has happened ahead of time where people feel that seen, heard, validated, and valued. If you're at work, I would recommend that one thing that is not helpful, or even in your family, wherever you are, one thing that is not helpful is to say, hey, I got a problem and here it is. We cannot just drop it on someone because the response to that is usually going to be defensive or hostile. So we plant seeds in conflict management. We're planting seeds. And this is not in a passive aggressive sort of way, but it is setting you and the person up to win. So my strategy for going into a conflict, how can I preserve their needs and meet my own? And that's where the depends comes in. It depends on the situation for that.
Yeah, and I think that makes, I mean, that's every situation, even in medicine. Patients will ask, well, how long is this going to take? Well, it depends, or is a trauma going to come in and throw everything? So that, I mean, there's that dynamic nature of it. I think for some of us, we have maybe not necessarily been socialized or had excellent practice at expressing our needs and are typically tend to do well at listening to others. Do you have any advice for some phrases that we could utilize so the other person knows, no, we are definitely hearing you, and we also it will help if we have an opportunity to share as well in a productive way?
Yeah, I think with speaking to the needs problem, I will say that I have discovered that naming my needs has been the most challenging thing that I have not yet gotten good at. And I hear my grandkids talk about, I need this, I need to be hugged, and I'm like, don't let your children lose that because somewhere in life we lose the ability, the okay to express our needs. And with the absence of knowing what we need, we're fighting, we're Don Quixote. We don't even know why we're fighting anymore. So when we can identify what we need, again, we can identify the solutions for that. And a little bit of a tangent, something I use religiously that anybody listening could pull up is John Gottman's anger iceberg. Because in conflict, what we typically see is somebody angry. And it's hard for all of us to relate to someone who is angry. But anger is just a broad brushstroke over a whole lot of emotions that we can relate to: tired, hopeless, embarrassed, ashamed. I mean, just a lot of things. And when we can identify what's going on that feels like anger, those things underneath, then we can identify our needs. So if I'm tired, obviously I need rest. If I feel excluded, I need to find a way in. So when we look at people with anger, we don't have to stamp them, as an angry person, because as you said, we are who we are in the moment, but also to think in terms of what is really going on with this person. What are the underlying needs? And that's kind of the secret nugget to resolving the conflict is figuring those out.
So figuring it out for the other person and for ourselves, because it's a lot easier to get our needs met if we can name them. And you're so right, kids and even pets are the best at this. Like my big 80-pound fluffy monster rhinoceros of a dog who's super sweet, he'll come up and he'll rub up against you and he'll wag his tail. He is clearly saying, I want to be petted right now. And kids like, I need a hug, I need a snack, I need a nap. And so if we even as a person are experiencing anger, so what are we angry about? That unmet expectation and unmet need. And so I love how you teach us to dive deeper into that so we can name it for ourselves and for other people.
Yeah, and we all have triggers. That's the thing too. I love the biology of conflict, right? Like our brains are not hardwired to be our best friends in conflict. They're hardwired to preserve us. So I don't know. I do these stats. It's like 90% of our thoughts are in the past, and like 80% of our thoughts are negative. This is how our brain inherently works, which is terrifying, right? And then we have all these biases going in too. So when I'm triggered, oh my goodness, I'm just having a bad moment, you know. But if you get triggered and show it out, you're a horrible person with character flaws. So it's kind of just acknowledging that we're human and we will all have our moments, and no one wants to be defined by their worst moments. So I think we have got to stop seeing people in the lens of their worst moment, naming them that moment, and realize truly that we all have these moments. And one thing I always say is, you know, life is an experiment because every single moment is one we've never been in before. Every moment is somewhat different. And sometimes we'll handle it great and sometimes we won't, but we learn from the won't. You know, we learn from that. We're all learning. So maybe a little more forgiveness and tolerance for ourselves and for other people too. This bar that somehow the world has drawn that we should never mess up, we should always get it right, and we should be perfect is not sustainable and it's really destroying us.
It's awful, it's exhausting, and then anytime we're not meeting that, we have that cognitive dissonance, that gap in our mind. This is where I should be, which is unrealistic. This is where I am, so I must be a terrible person.
Yes, and we're more prone to point that at somebody else than ourselves.
Oh, absolutely. It's
You
great
know?
to blame other people for why I'm a terrible person.
Right. And I like to talk about should because even, especially in healthcare, you get a lot of shoulds. They should know. I mean, even when I was working with families and couples more, well, he should know. I told him once, like, who told you that it only takes once? And what do you mean they should know? Because our shoulds are our values, our roles, our expectations, and we all have different ones of those. So instead of the assumption of should or judging you by how I judge and hold myself, it is to learn who you are and understand your values too. And again, find that and.
Yeah, and I love that. I think the should is really key. I always say stop shoulding on yourself and stop shoulding on other people. It's a little spicier way to put it. But I
I
realize,
love that.
and it's funny because I have absolutely done that with my kids. Like I told you once, you should remember it until the end of time because of course this is some wise parenting and the reality, right? And the reality is not that. And I have something on our fridge. I love to put inspirational stuff on my fridge. I'm sure my kids will complain about that in the future. But one of them is so we judge ourselves by our intent and others by their impact. And they're doing the same to us. So it's important to help step back and understand my intent might have been this, but being aware this was my impact, and closing that gap is also really key. So just for the judgment of self and for how we interact with others.
Yeah, that's very, very wise. I like that a lot. So it is part of understanding the underlying issues or the underlying story is understanding what the intent was. And again, it goes back to an experiment, right? Like I meant for this to happen, but it went sideways. And the interesting thing in my old age that I realize is even the best of things have a consequence. Like everything has a consequence. And we go through life maybe trying to mitigate for that consequence, but we can't. The other thing I think, Jamie, that I really think is important is that we need to stop trying to mitigate for other people's response and emotions. So I don't want to make them mad. I don't want to upset them. I don't want to whatever. We have no idea what the reaction or response is. But I think if we're kindly honest and someone is uncomfortable, that becomes their problem to solve. It is not our job to try to be, you know, to be the person who keeps everyone on an even keel because we're not on an even keel. One of my favorite sayings is, you know, we're not rational human beings with emotions. In fact, we're emotional human beings who can only be rational when we, as we see ourselves, are seen, heard, and validated. So we have to be honest and let the consequences of that happen. Of course, honest doesn't mean cruel. Honest doesn't mean dumping on somebody. Honest means owning what is ours and how that experience affected us, not saying, hey, this is who you should be and what you should do. And people, I really say that when we try to mitigate for other people's feelings, we're robbing them of an opportunity to grow. We will have road bumps in our relationships, and getting through those road bumps will make us stronger. We have to get through them. So the things that become walls, like a trigger, you do something I don't like, and it's like, oh, see, you're a terrible person. And then you walk away. Conflict management is about turning those walls into doors. How can we get through this and still come back together again?
Oh my gosh, so much to unpack there. I felt that on a deep visceral level. So not trying to manage for other people's emotions, because that is certainly something that I still do. And I like that you used the word kind honesty, because some of us feel uncomfortable giving feedback. So instead of being honest, we don't say anything, which is dishonest. Then you get those people that say they like brutal honesty, but I really think they like the brutality more than the honesty, right? So you said kind honesty and feedback, and it's not our responsibility. I can't make someone feel that. And I love how you said it, you're robbing them of an opportunity. What a great way to frame it for people who struggle with giving that honest feedback. Wow.
I think you have to earn the right to give feedback. And first of all, ask if you have feedback. Hey, there's something I want to talk about. Is now a good time? Or do you mind if I talk about? I wanted to give feedback to a client the other day, and I said, this is not related to what we saw, but this is or what we were talking about, but this is something I saw. Would you like me to share what that was? And they responded back and did not address that. So that was a no. But as far as for feedback, we are banks, and this is another John Gottman thing. You have to pour into people in order to have the right to take out in the form of criticism or feedback. And criticism, I don't mean as a bad thing, I mean as an opportunity for growth. So very often, especially in a workplace, we haven't poured the positive in. We haven't built a relationship that is appreciative, honors what you've done right, just speaking good into you. 80% of the time, 8 out of 10 times, I need to put in, thank you for that, Dr. Hope, you did fantastic. Whatever it takes to build the relationship. Then I have earned the right to make withdrawals because there are things in there, right? But if we don't pour into the bank and we're just criticizing and pointing out what people are doing wrong, we're just taking, you know,
Yeah, and
and
it's
it's not going to be well received.
no, and I've heard of the compliment sandwich, which is where you say something good and then give them what you're actually trying to say, and then say something else good. And I could see your face, like, I don't like this either, because then I don't believe the thing on either end of that. And I can tell by your expression, you clearly don't. I mean, we would call it a shit sandwich. Like, it still doesn't taste good no matter how much bread you put on it, right? So
Yeah.
you're talking about genuinely pouring into the relationship in an honest and true way, not just doing this nonsense sandwich.
Yeah. Well, I don't like that at all either, because that's just, yeah, I like what you said about it. It just seems so disingenuous, and you're only going to hear what's in the middle anyway. It is the practice of pouring that in regularly so that you can say, hey, Jamie, I had a problem with what happened. I had a problem with what happened, not you did something wrong. Can we talk about that problem? And then I often start that with, the story I'm telling myself around that. Like, you turn around and walked away. I saw you turn around, walk away. And so the story I told myself around that is that you're mad at me. Is there something going on? So I also use the phrase, the story I'm telling myself around something, because it's not blame, it's just, this is what's going on inside of me. And I have never, ever had pushback, knock on wood, using that. Now I've set myself up for failure, but using that phrase, the story I'm telling myself, or how I experienced that, so that I'm taking ownership of what that discussion is.
When I find that just in general, I have found that better of saying, like, you are wrong and you did this, though bringing it back to those I statements, because I can't control what you are feeling or what you think. And I don't necessarily love people telling me what they think I am doing currently. But just saying, like, but if I know how they are experiencing it, or the story they're telling themselves is very different than what actually is going on my end, then it gives us an opportunity to get to clarity.
Exactly, exactly. The other key that I can't leave without mentioning is listening, especially when it's challenging. I begin a mediation by asking people to listen for what is right, because the two things, I'm listening, but I'm listening trying to figure out what you're saying is wrong. And so listening to disagree with you, or I'm formulating my next argument. Listen to understand. And then we use active listening skills, which are just amazing, because I hear you say something, Jamie. So I hear you say that this is important to you and you wish I would have whatever. And that builds the connection when people know that you hear them, and it helps you understand it better. It helps them hear the way they're coming across as well. So listening is incredibly important to the whole process of conflict resolution.
And I see that kind of throughout your suite of services. So the different ways you work with people. I know you do work with families, but you're working primarily with organizations. So you've got your individual coaching opportunities if people need that. And quite frankly, everybody should. Teams and doing the conflict training where you come in for an organization. And then as a consultant to help with managers, as a manager of a department, I thought that I would get to do a lot of coaching and affecting care delivery. And when you're dealing with the complaints and stuff, if you're not skilled at that, it is uncomfortable. You're not great at it. So I assume that regardless of how you're teaching, whether it's to a big organization or a team, there are some similarities kind of in terms of the skill set that your people need to build.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. It's amazing to me that in all the contexts, you have to choose the right tools. And the toolbox, like an ER doc, your toolbox, you can't even say how many tools you have for managing in
And
there.
some of it's just
We
duct
can't.
tape, but we use it.
That's that's a great point. I love that. I love that because definitely I use duct tape in my job, but I've never even thought of that. Yeah, that's very cool. But they are things that transcend everything from community problems to workplace to family. They're skills that are universally that work, that just are successful universally. It's sort of a trial and error. It's being intently in the moment, and keeping the outcome in mind and working from that place. Yeah.
And I think so for our listeners, many of us are our parents, some of us are in the sandwich generation where we're taking care of kids and a parent and working and just trying to interact with humanity right now. As you said, some people are just looking for all the things that are wrong in what you said and not in the things we agree. So, I mean, these skills, whether it's trying to make sure that dad doesn't drive anymore or trying to get your employee to show up on time, the tools in the toolbox, and you pull out the right one for the right thing, like you need the hammer here and this there, but this is a universally applicable set of tools. And I'm not kidding when I say this should just be curriculum, right? This should just be life life curriculum.
Yeah, no, I agree. I try to use any opportunity to teach either peer mediation or conflict management skills to kids, because I will jokingly say that I've given up on adults, which I have not. But I do think that learning these skills are critical, if we could just teach children these skills. And when we think of what we learn about conflict, I mean, I'll say to people, what happened to you when you were a little one and you were the source of conflict? Right? Because that's how you learn to deal with conflict, part of how you learn to deal with conflict. So most of us haven't had a good opportunity to see what effective conflict management is like. Most of us were punished or time out, which means you're isolated, you're rejected. I mean, most of us have a history of being dealt with in conflict that does not teach us how to do it well. So I do believe it's just skills to learn, and they're not that hard. And for me, it was fun. I mean, for me, it's fun. Now we're still human and we're still going to mess up. And, we still have brains that are triggered and long histories of things that are habits that, it's still not a perfect solution to everything, but it is a perfect process to getting somewhere better than where you are.
Yeah. And as we, as us old dogs learn new tricks, which is key, but imagine how different the world would be if kids learned this from an early age. And so they bring that up. So when it starts with a fight on the playground or that, that first crush that somebody else has a crush, all those things, if we practice those skills and grow with them, how much less strife there would be in the world. Wow.
Yeah, for sure. I have the cutest story of little like kindergartners in conflict management. It's just adorable. I'm so happy this school does this, but they have a closet, which alarmed me when I'm like, oh, we have a conflict closet. I'm like, oops. But what happens is if these children have a conflict, say, somebody took your crayons, they have in this closet a wand and a stuffed animal. And I go over to the person in conflict and I say something like, the stuffed animal, George. George and I have something we want to talk to you about. I point the wand, right? And so they go off into the closet and they have their discussion. It's not moderated by any adult, but they resolve their issue and come out. Now, the real phrase that they use is quite adorable, how they start the conflict. And I can't remember exactly what it is, but it's something non threatening, like basically, we have a problem to solve. Let's go over here and solve that problem. And they do. And nobody knows what happens in the closet because they come out having worked through the problem on their own. No blame, no anything. They got their stuffed animal to witness it and, obviously disarm the situation. And they're learning how to manage their own conflict.
I don't, maybe adults need to bring more stuffed animals into the thing, right? We all have that need. It's great. I have kids, so I can have as many stuffies as I want. So it's great. But really kind of creating it as a we space instead of me versus you space is so key.
That was very well said. If you need another job as a conflict manager, I believe you have the heart and really the skills for it and the understanding of it. So yeah,
This
it
is
always delights me to see someone who gets it because you are making a difference in the world. Besides what you do as a physician in the ER, that type of getting people and wanting the best for people and wanting the best outcomes, just the heart is, I think it's contagious.
yes, and so if there's more of that in the world. And so I've had a lot of fun diving into your website. First of all, any domain name that's easy to find and understand, so bestconflictsolutions.com, right? That's already a good win. But so you do interact with people in a lot of different ways, kind of depending on their needs. So what types of people are coming to you now, and how could anyone who's listening who is thinking, "Hey, I could use a brush up on this." What is the best way to interact with you? Because like I said, we all need these skills.
Yeah, I agree. I think right now, as I said, it's more organizational, but I do get people who are stuck in conflict that just want a coach
Yep.
through that conflict. I do for the Los Angeles City Attorney's Office, their community police mediations too. I mean, we all know that there's issues between community and police that have caused
Oh
a
yeah,
rift. And
absolutely.
again, I almost always see people, good people on both sides, and having that conversation really just is transformational. So if you are stuck in conflict and want a better outcome, and you know, I just finished working with a business who left an incredible review. It just made me want to cry on my Google site. But they said this, the process wasn't easy, but it is so much easier than staying stuck in that conflict. And I guess I just heard my dad in my head say, nothing worthwhile is easy. I think it is worthwhile. I think you matter enough that finding a better way out of this, if it's weighing heavy on you and helping someone else find a better way out of this. We live in an era of estrangement and boundaries, which boundaries have become just walls, excuses to not have to resolve something sometimes. And we need one another. We need one another. And I think if we can figure out how to connect and see each other for what we have in common. One of I want to leave you with something that I just believe so much, and that is just because I don't agree with you doesn't mean I'm against you.
Oh
It
my
means
gosh,
I'm
that alone,
it means
especially during
I'm
an election
different than
year.
you. It means I'm different than you. It means I'm me. It means my biology, my life experiences have created this person. And if I had your biology and your life experiences, I would be doing exactly what you're doing. So yeah, just because I don't agree with you doesn't mean I'm against you. It means I'm different than you.
What an incredible message. That's something that should be on billboards and t-shirts and really internalize that because you see people fighting on social media, which has just got to be the biggest waste of time imaginable because all it does is entrench the other person deeper against you. And I always thought that was kind of bizarre. So we're not always all going to agree. but it doesn't mean we have to be against each other. And I like this on your website too. I like the blog articles because they are resources for people who are thinking, gosh, I want to continue these skills. I want to continue to interact with this. I want to grow with this. So there's lots of ways that you can do it, whether they interact with you directly. Start by reading some of the blog things. We really want to point the world to this set of skills and mindset. I think that's so key.
That's awesome. Even for me, when you're the one in the conflict, I like to say I'm really good at my job, and I'm not being ridiculous. I am. I love my job and I'm good at it, unless it's my own conflict. Because
Wait, so you're a human being too? What?
I am. I like to tell the story. My 16-year-old, well, he was 16 then, he's 22 now, but I was tucking him in one night and yeah, his room was a mess. And I'm like, what's this? And he's like, what? And I'm like, this. And he's like, I don't see anything. And for me, it's a trigger to know a reality that someone else denies. So instead of picking up his pillow and putting it over his face, I turned around and walked out of the room, which is not a good way to resolve conflict. That's not. Walking away is not a good way to resolve conflict. And as I'm walking down the steps, I hear a voice say behind me, and you call yourself a conflict manager. And I
Oh,
loved that. I loved that because it reminded me how hard it is when we're the ones that are in conflict, right? Which,
yeah.
I mean, it was humbling. So I have my third parties that I go to help me see what I can't see when I'm in conflict.
Yes. Well, and thank you for humanizing that because we all see an expert like you. You're a thought leader, a results leader in this space, and that you still need to go back to the toolbox and use your own tools. And I have so much more respect for people who talk about, hey, I'm not perfect at this either. And I have to use the tools that I teach, or I wouldn't make it through my day without it. So that is really helpful.
Yeah, I completely understand. Sometimes it's like I don't want to use the tool. I just want to be,
I just want to be
stomp my
mad.
foot and be exactly. Exactly. But then I'm like, oh, craps.
Yes.
You
When
know,
you have more pressure than the average person with your expertise, you're like, ah, darn it, now I got to go use my stupid tools. All right, here we go.
that's
But then you
exactly right.
do, and you feel better. So,
The
well,
thing that gets me back to that is wanting to stay in relationship with the people. Like at the end of the day, the relationship has to matter more than being right. And we've all heard that, but I mean, it's true. It's true. And my kids have taught me how to be wrong.
well, mine are more than happy to point out many of mine.
Right. Right.
So, well, this is incredible. And we'll put the link to your website, thebestconflictsolutions.com, and your social medias in the show notes so people can find you. I know there's a lot of listeners who are going to want to dive deeper and realize they have conflict in their life. And instead of continuing to bang your head against the wall, it is time to find a door. So, Kimberly, thank you. This was incredible. This is so valuable. I want to share this with the world so we can all do conflict better. So thank you again for your time with us today.
It has been delightful. You're wonderful. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for tuning into today's episode of the Navigating Hope podcast. Our guest today was Kimberly Best, an expert in conflict mediation, elder care, and end of life decision making. Kimberly has dedicated her career to helping individuals, families, and even companies and hospitals navigate the complex and often emotional aspects of healthcare and caregiving. Before we dive into the 5 key takeaways, I want to remind you that your free gift with this episode is a Smarter Goals worksheet. If you're navigating conflict in caregiving or end of life decisions, start by setting clear, achievable goals around communication and relationship building. Download our Smarter Goals worksheet to help you set meaningful goals for improving your communication and reducing conflict. Click the link in the show notes to access this valuable tool. And now here they are, your top 5 takeaways. Number 1, conflict resolution begins with understanding. Kimberly shared that conflict often arises from misunderstanding or unmet needs. By approaching conflict with empathy and focusing on understanding the underlying emotions, we can transform adversarial interactions into constructive conversations. Number 2, separate the person from the problem. One of the foundational principles Kimberly teaches is to focus on the issue rather than blaming the individuals. This shift allows for problem solving that respects all parties involved and leads to healthier, more productive relationships. Number 3, the importance of being seen, heard, and valued. In any conflict, people need to feel validated and valued. Kimberly emphasized that offering acknowledgement, even without full agreement, can pave the way for mutual respect and understanding, which are essential in caregiving and end-of-life discussions. Number 4, managing family dynamics in elder care. Caregiving decisions, especially around aging and end-of-life care, are often complicated by long-standing family dynamics. Kimberly advises families to address unresolved issues early, creating space where each person's voice is heard and respected. And number 5, Kimberly encourages kind honesty, giving feedback and expressing needs without causing unnecessary harm. By avoiding brutal honesty and focusing instead on constructive dialogue, family members and caregivers can build stronger, more resilient relationships. So there you have it, your 5 key takeaways. Listen, conflict is a natural part of life, but with the right approach, it doesn't have to be destructive. By focusing on empathy, respect, and clear communication, we can build relationships that withstand the challenges of caregiving and end-of-life care. Stay compassionate, stay communicative, and as always, keep navigating your journey with hope.
Thank you for tuning into Navigating Hope with me, Dr. Jaime Hope. It has been an honor to navigate the realms of health and wellness with you today. Remember, in the journey toward a healthier life, knowledge is your compass. If you enjoyed our time together, please share, like, and subscribe to Navigating Hope. Join us next week where we'll continue to empower your health journey, arming you with the wisdom to navigate life's challenges and keep the emergency room in your rearview mirror.